Welcome back everybody to another episode of Space Engineers. Today I wanted to try and take a look at designing and building a spaceship that's very simple. Go through the process of making a spaceship very simple. Is this the best way to do it? Probably not. It's probably not. But it is a simple and effective process that I typically use when designing spaceships. So I'm going to do a step-by-step process on how to start with a simple shape such as a triangle and turn it into a pretty sweet starfighter. And if you follow along, you might be able to make the same kind of thing. So let's just jump into it, shall we? So here it is, picking the shape of our ship. Now in this step, you're pretty much just going to find a random shape, something that speaks out to you, something that, breathes character, something that will resemble the final product, but isn't the entire ship as a whole. Now I'd like to remind everyone that we're not picking a shape that our ship will be in the end. I'm just using a basic shape to get a sense of structure of what we will eventually build. So rather than just taking a triangle such as this and just making it thicker and slapping thrusters on it, we are going to add similar shapes to this small triangle to make it even better. Now the next step that I like to take when designing a ship is figuring out what the main hull is going to be. So like the main cockpit part where most of your systems are going to lay. Now, as you can see, we literally just added a pretty much big blocky section to the center part of this triangle. This will eventually be the completed cockpit of the starfighter. You'll notice that I have some void areas in the front, and that's to allow me to later on add whatever armaments. I like to keep these sections blank up until the point where I'm adding components, so I have total freedom to add whatever I want. Now in this particular build, I wanted to be able to actually enter this small starfighter, so I hollowed out a section inside just big enough that my character could potentially walk up into. In this stage of the build, you're pretty much just getting an idea of what your starship is going to be. Nothing too complex, nothing too complicated, just centralized areas. Once you have the basic planning done for your ship, you can go ahead and move on to something a little more intricate. Now here, as you can tell, this ship has little thruster cells on each side of the wing. At this point, I start to think about, how do I want thrusters to fit on this ship? Do I want it a big thruster right behind the cockpit? Obviously not, because I want to be able to access the inside. So I thought it might be a good idea to just make little thruster cells on the outside of the wings. In a lot of my builds, I really do like to add thick thrusters or big protruding parts off the wings, because it adds just a more bulky feel to your ship. Rather than just having completely straight wings like a plane, you kind of have these big fuselage or silos or even sometimes armaments on the outside of your craft. I feel like in spaceships, it's not really necessary to just have like a big unnecessary wing. So adding like thrusters on the very tip of it can allow you to incorporate the long wing design while still making sense in space. In this setup, I also decide to take a little turn away from the typical triangle shape, and I actually extend the wings and put them on a different angle. Still keeping within the guidelines of the triangle, but now it has a more elongated, slight curve to the wing. Once you finish the basic planning of your ship, you can now move on to the components, the fun part. Wow, look at that. Yeah, obviously there's a drastic change in this planning, but once I add the components to the ship, I feel like it allows you to finalize your detailing. I've found that the best way to approach building a ship is leaving the components to the very end. That way you can retain the same aesthetic that you want in a ship rather than just building around the components. So as you can see in the wing, I've actually added conveyors and reactors, and I have hydrogen tanks that are actually just sticking out the bottom. But that actually gives it a nice appearance as if there's legit fuel just kind of hanging on the underside of the wing, kind of like a real fighter jet. In this setup phase, you're able to start adding thrusters and, you know, rounding out where the thruster cell is. So I've kind of made it a little more round in the front. I've made it so that I have the perfect amount of thrusters in each direction, as well as still keeping it aesthetically pleasing to my liking. Another thing to keep in mind is that on the underside of my ship, I have a lot of these components exposed. When you're building smaller ships, sometimes it's nice to integrate the actual component look into your ship. Like I was saying before, these hydrogen tanks extended out and added little column blocks to each end makes it look like an actual fuel tank just sitting there on the bottom of the ship. Totally not necessary, but this is the detailing that makes your ship come to life. And once you've completed that, you can finally move on to coloring, the best part. Well, I said the last part was the best part, but this is even better than that part. When I color my ships, I like to utilize different colors to segregate or section off the different parts of the ship. You'll notice I have these tan and red striped hulls as like tube things with this bright contrasting white wing. Rather than just coloring a ship one color, which very few people do, I feel like adding multiple different kinds of colors and contrasting colors really makes your ship pop, makes your ship look realistic. Now, as you can see, I actually use the little half slab blocks to cover the top layer of the conveyors and make it blend in a little more. It makes the ship just a tiny bit more bulky, but I really do like the finished product and how it looks. And with all of that tedious work out of the way, you now have a finalized basic ship built from a simple shape. Well, there it is. That's how you build a ship from a shape. So let's just take a closer look at what we have created. As you can see, marvelous style of ship. I didn't have an idea of what I was going to make. I kind of just went with the ship and I just did something that I felt like made sense, right? Some sort of angular, sharp, triangular ship. I think everyone thinks the most part for triangles, it has a very jet-like, fighter-like style and appearance. So that's kind of what I just went through. Now I just want to show the ship in its whole once you actually fly it and we turn on the engines. Nice. Oh yeah. Looks pretty good, looks sleek, and it maneuvers not to my exact liking, but honestly it's fine. But during the spots where you're building your ship and you're kind of in between the components and coloring it, I kind of like to just take my ship out and just test it out, kind of like to make sure that, you know, I have all the thrusters that I need in the right spots that are going to make it look good while still keeping the ship maneuvering the way I want it to. Honestly, this is perfectly fine for me though. You know, it's just a fun ship. I'm going a little more for aesthetic rather than functionality, but obviously making it still functional. So it wouldn't be a chonk ship without some cool extra details. So let me show you how you enter the ship. Now you notice that we have these angled blocks here and a button right above. So if I just go ahead and press 2, a little ramp comes down. Very nice. That's kind of what I was trying to keep in mind, is I just wanted to have a fighter, but you could access it not through just hopping into the cockpit, rather than actually accessing it through the inside of the ship. So if I come around back, you'll notice that I can perfectly walk. I can perfectly walk into the ship if this was, as you can see, I'm on a bit of an angle, and this is supposed to sit flush and flat, and it's just a degree off, so I actually can't just walk straight in, but normally you could. So once you're inside, this just allows you to A, access the cockpit, but B, fix any component inside. You know, you have most components just kind of like in here accessible to you. like the gyroscopes, the conveyors, connectors, and then you have access to, well, you don't have access, but you can see you have your 2 cargo containers there on each side. And it's a little bit of poor planning, but on the underside, if you can see that over here, we have the 2 reactors exposed. Now, the lore behind it is these reactors run hard nuclear energy and they're bursting out emissions, so it needs a place to vent, and that's why it's open like that, even though it could easily be covered. But I thought that was fine enough, because if you landed on a planet or something, you actually have access to these reactors, so you could go under your ship and you could repair them. Now, I love how these thrusters turned out. This is just absolutely amazing, if I do say so myself. I see these on a lot of the builds online, is that people take these panel blocks and they use like kind of like I don't know what you would call them, like directional rudders, or like cool things around your thrusters, these things, but it just adds that level of layer and detail. Totally not necessary. They don't do much protection, maybe a little bit of protection on the side for this thruster, but again, it just adds character and shape. It makes it seem like it's a little more faster, a little more maneuverable than it normally would be. All in all, pretty simple build, pretty easy to just go off of one little shape to create a ship of your liking. Now, I made a front-facing triangular ship, but I mean, you could take the same shape, a triangle, and spin it around, right? You could have the cockpit on the other side. You could make it asymmetrical. You could have the cockpit on one side, a big thruster in the middle, and then your armaments on the other side. Much like a B-wing. Now, you see shapes all throughout sci-fi ships, you know, the more iconic ships being like the Star Destroyer, a triangular, aggressive attack ship, and whereas the Rebels, you know, those kinds of shapes are all different because it's a rebel organization, it's a rebel cell, so it's a whole bunch of different aliens and races coming together. So you'll see many different shapes and sizes of spaceships, which work really good together. So if you're ever feeling stuck or you don't know what to build, just start with a shape. Pick a circle, a square, a rectangle, an octagon. Multiply the shapes, add different shapes to it, and soon enough you'll have a ship of your liking. Another thing is like, I like using the shape as just an idea. I mean, you could take the whole triangle shape and just make it a triangle, make it thicker, have all the components inside, and no thruster cells, no main hub. But I kind of like just taking a basic shape and adding other ones to it. I feel like that adds a lot more character to the ships that you make. Ships. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and if you did, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Check out some of my other videos, and I'll see you in the next. And as always, stay thick, stay chonky, stay beautiful, my chonk followers. This has been your Lord playing Space Engineers. Now signing out. Subscribe.